Welcome to episode 5 of this Conversation Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Susan Protasio, your host, and today we have a very interesting topic. Have you wondered about the stresses that you're having in your life? So what do you do when life kind of knocks you down? And when life throws you a curveball, how do you cope? So today we have a guest, and she's a chaplain, and she will give her insights on all the questions that we have. And she is a member of the Sisters of the Precious Blood and also a board certified chaplain through the National Association of Catholic Chaplains. And she has led workshops on grief and grief associated with murder and suicide. So let's welcome Sister Terry Mahar.
Yeah,
Welcome, Sister.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and thank you also for your presence. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You have led workshops about grief and grief associated with murder and suicide. So I kind of went deeper and looked into the grief. And then grief, it says, is defined as a deep sorrow. It is deeply personal and can arise from various life experiences, often tied to loss or significant change. And then when I look at it, there were like more than 40 life events that can lead to grief. And as we all know, the common causes are death of a loved one, which is the most profound triggers of grief. And we have estrangement, like losing a close relationship either from separation or conflict. And then we have financial loss. The reason it leads to grief is because of loss of financial stability. Then we have illness or injury, like personal, health challenges. We have divorce or separation, loss of a job or career because it can impact identity and stability as well. Even moving or relocation can lead to grief because you're leaving something familiar or a familiar community. And then also unfulfilled dreams or goals because you lost the opportunity for that goal. So one way or another, we're going to experience a moment of grief, right? Because of like, what's the future's going to be, what's next, what now? So can you please share your insight about grief and what are the more common causes of grief that you encounter as a chaplain?
Well, I think you've named many of them in your list. And for me, as a hospital chaplain, most grief that I would encounter certainly is death and illness. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the pieces that needs to most be remembered is we can't compare grief, whether it's through a death or whether it's through mm-hmm. an illness, loss of a job, mm-hmm. miscarriage. That's one of the most kind of unexpressed grief, right. Because many folks, unless they've been through it, cannot understand that. It's an unspoken grief. And even with an illness, whether it's a common cold or a diagnosis of cancer or an amputation, mm-hmm. There are many people need to spend time with that, right, and come out on the other side. If I'm visiting a patient that's having a toe amputated or a foot, I ask them to spend time thinking about what that foot did for them mm-hmm. from the time they were conceived, because your foot can kick your mom, right, to the time they crawled, to the time that they learned to walk and run, all the journeys at that mm-hmm. foot, so that there's, in that grieving process, letting go, who am I going to be with one foot? Who am I going to be with one arm? Who am I going to be in the world that prides itself on the ability to be right. independent?
Right.
That's all part of grieving.
Right, right. And then since you mentioned about encountering patients like diagnosed with cancer, so I thought, how do you help them navigate through that process of grief? How do you help them navigate that emotions into a safe space,
Well, one of the unfortunate pieces being a hospital chaplain, I only get to see that patient for however long they're in that hospital, and it may not be a 2-time visit or a 3-time visit, depending on how they are or how busy I am visiting other patients. What I tend to do is begin to ask them some of the harder questions.
Like?
What does that mean for them?
Okay.
How do they, have they ever thought about cancer? What do they think about cancer?
Okay.
Depending on the kind of cancer that
Right.
they have. Are they able to spend time thinking about it? Can they draw pictures of what they think that cancer looks like?
Okay.
Can they write it a letter that they don't send, but perhaps they can burn it, rip it up, or whatever. They're ripping up the cancer. They're burning the cancer. They're getting some of that anger, that loss, that hope, and then making room then for hope to come in.
Right. Yes, because as we know, grief is not linear. There is a healing time, and there's always the, being afraid of the future, what's next, you know? And as I was checking, there are 5 stages of grieving process, and we have denial first, and then anger, then bargaining, and then after that, depression, because they're overwhelmed, they feel helpless, and then after that, the 5th stage is the acceptance. So in that process of grieving, do you help them identify like what stage they are in, or you just note that, okay, this person is in this stage and the next one is, so how do you manage through that?
What we're learning about these so-called stages, I mean, they were written by Catherine Kubler-Ross, and she actually wrote them first to identify the grieving process of illness, not necessarily death that we normally associate it with these days. But the other thing that's been noted is that even though we call them stages, there are steps. You do step 1, you do step 2, you do step 3. You get to that 5th step, you're done. Now, you could be at step 3, move back to step 1, find yourself at step 4, thinking, okay, I'm ready for step 5, find yourself back at step 2. So grieving, when we say like 5 stages, we make it sound too clean.
Right, as if like you're done with the first step, then you're now on the second and not coming back to the. Let's
we're
say,
done. We're done with stage 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something that we need to give ourselves permission to be okay with. So you may be, say, five years away from the death of a spouse. And you're in the store, and suddenly somebody has your spouse's aftershave, and that triggers that grief all over again. When you think you're in a whole different place, boom, you're back. You're back to the shock. You're back to the sadness. You're something so simple as aftershave, or hearing a song, or
it reminds you. It reminds you.
Right. So it just tells you, okay, this is another piece of grief that I need to let go. I need to be patient and go through the process and be okay when I get to the other side. And should I be triggered again, then it's going to be okay.
Yes.
And telling ourselves that it's okay is sometimes the harder piece, because then it's like we get wrapped up in, why am I going through this again? It's like we get angry at ourselves for having to go through it again when we think we're done.
So we should allow ourselves that space, and probably just say, okay, I remember, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And sometimes, even when you're triggered like that, it's like, okay, can I say I'm grateful that I got that hint of aftershave, that I get to think about you, rather than perhaps having a negative feeling. Can we turn it into a positive feeling? Making it make, oh, wow, this was a gift. It wasn't a negative, it's a gift. I get to think about you again.
So that's nice.
And I get to celebrate the memory again. Instead of feeling that pain of loss, can I put some gratitude, put some hope? Hey, if I wasn't at the store, not smelling the aftershave, I wouldn't have this opportunity.
Right. That's nice. I like that perspective. So when you led the workshop for grief and the grief that's associated with suicide and murder, Can you share briefly what those workshops were?
They were very intense workshops because the traumatic grief is very different than what has been called normal grief.
Okay.
Though for those of us who have been through normal grief, you kind of wonder what makes it normal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So traumatic grief is like a sudden death, unexpected, not through illness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so car accident, murder, suicide. So death associated with traumatic grief is very different. For murder, there are 12 components. And for the most part, when somebody loses a loved one to murder, you can't even begin the grieving process until perhaps they found the person who killed your loved one. If they haven't done that, then it's like that takes forever and your grieving is somewhat put on hold. And if they do find the person, then you have to wait. It's kind of like the grief is on hold because now you have to wait for the trial to take place.
Right.
And then once all of that's done, then it's like, then you can begin, all right? With suicide, there are 15 components. And embedded in those components are, guilt.
Okay.
Why
yes.
didn't I see this coming?
Right, right.
How could I have done things differently?
Right.
What did this person say to allow me to know that this was in the plan?
Right.
Oh, he seemed so happy. How did that happen? So we begin to have to plow through a lot of self-blame.
Right. Right.
That may not be ours.
Right.
So in the workshop, there are actually two pieces to it. One is we were training church people how to companion folks who have had someone murdered or complete suicide. Then we had a support group for families of murder and suicide. And in that support group, it was based on restorative storytelling. So it became important for me to ask you, instead of asking you how that person died, okay, how did that person live?
Oh, that's wonderful.
And with any kind of grief, whether it's the normal grief or traumatic grief, it's always important that if you are the one listening to the story, you always call that individual by name.
Okay.
So if it's a loss of a spouse, well, tell me about Jim.
Okay.
What did Jim like to do?
Okay.
Okay, so it's not about dying,
It's
it's about how he lived.
Yeah.
Okay, and always call that person by name.
Yeah.
So it is with the murder-suicide. How did that person live their life?
Instead of who killed the person.
Who killed or what
Or
happened?
then,
How'd they die? Okay, and being able to listen to that story over and over and over and over again. So as chaplains, one of the things that it seems so simple, it's one of the hardest things to do, is to be able to listen.
Yes.
Did you know that when you meet somebody for the first time, you make 11 judgments of them in 7 seconds?
Yes, 7 seconds.
So when you're asked to listen to somebody and you've already made 11 judgments, you've already built like a little wall.
Right.
So it's like, okay, let's not build that wall and listen to the words, because as chaplains we learn that patients and family, the folks that I've done with grief support, it's more important to listen than to give an answer. Very often when we listen, we're listening to give an answer.
Right, right.
Okay, we're not listening to hear the pain. We're not listening to hear the words that this person is saying. We're listening. We've already got an answer in our minds, right? So it's more important to know that that person has the answer within him or herself. We've just got to help them get there with reflective listening, compassionate presence. That person will get there.
Yes, yes. No matter how long, no matter how it takes time, he's gonna get there.
Right.
In time,
Right.
In time.
So You know, if a person is coming to you for the 15th time to tell you how his or her spouse died, then please listen.
Listen.
And even if you get to a point where you feel you can tell the story, please listen. That's more important. You know, as Christians, we believe in the scriptures. So think of the two people walking on the road to Emmaus, and they're grieving the death of Jesus. They're talking about the death of Jesus, and suddenly a stranger, you, the stranger, are walking down the road with them, listening to their grief. Okay? And Jesus didn't stop and then say, oh, wait, oh, here I am. Okay, you don't need to grieve anymore.
Yes.
He let them grieve.
Let them grieve.
And then in the breaking of the bread, they were able to understand and see.
Right, right. That's wonderful. Now, with grief, there is also the glimmer of hope, right? So how do we find hope in grief?
One, we ask the individual what gives them hope.
Okay.
Okay. And again, without judgment. Some of the hope can rest in wrestling with image of God. I run, obviously in the hospital, you run into people you run into family members of patients who are dying.
Okay.
And they get to a point where perhaps that patient is on life support, intubated, and the question is asked, do you want your mother to have CPR?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah,
their organs are stopping. And as a chaplain, I can never take their hope away, the hope of a miracle, right?
Correct.
So, and then they'll say, well, no, God will give us a miracle. Well, I can't challenge that either. I can only affirm their hope.
Right.
Okay? So if that person then dies, then they can get angry at God because God didn't answer their prayer. So we help them navigate that as well.
Yeah.
We help them navigate that anger at God because God didn't answer their prayer.
Correct.
Again, not to fix it, not to give them something to make it all feel better. But I think we all need to wrestle with God. Jacob did in the Old Testament. And when we look at our relationships with God, there have been times maybe we've had to put God on a timeout because God didn't do it right.
Right.
Okay?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, think of people who are married or your good friendships.
Yes.
Those relationships aren't the same as they were the day you met.
Correct.
So in deepening some of that faith, God didn't answer my prayer, then we've got to let them work through that relationship. Okay? And again, to be that listening presence. Don't need to have the answers. That's the most freeing thing that we can have. Don't need to have the answers. People who fight with their spouse, they're not looking for someone to give them the answer how to make it all better again.
Right, right.
Sometimes you got to go through therapy. Sometimes you can work it out together. Same with grief. To come to that element of hope, you've got to walk through the muck to get there.
Yes, and figure it out.
And figure it out. So, you know, if I come in saying, "Oh, this is the answer, just do this," and it goes wrong,
then they blame
then
you.
then I get the blame.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have to figure it out.
They have to figure it out. So, you know, I've had family members murdered. I've had family members drop dead, and so I never go to a patient, say, a family of somebody who's murdered, saying, "Oh, I know what to do because I had a family member murdered."
You cannot.
I know what to do, okay? What I can do is say, I know what murder feels like. Tell me what it's like for you. Okay, so that kind of opens a door to somewhat of an equal kind of experience, okay? I can't tell people this is what I did to plow through all the murder stuff.
Because people are
because
different.
that relationship is different, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and their experiences is different totally from one another. So
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
So you may know what it's like to lose a spouse,
Yeah.
but you can't go to somebody else and say, well, yeah, my husband died this way too. I know what it feels like, so let me tell you what to do. Okay?
Yeah.
No, because that relationship was way different.
Right, right. That's why they say that you cannot know it or feel it unless you are in their shoes. You
Exactly.
know? You know? So,
Exactly.
yeah. And also, I think another thing that could help with the grieving is human connection, you know? When something, let's say they're diagnosed with an illness, to kind of turn to their family, to their friends, to the support group, or like probably a spiritual leader to help them navigate through the grief. So that human connection, I think, is a part of the healing process.
Yeah.
So can you give your insights on that?
I think that's very important.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think the individual, again, just needs to be free to, many people who are grieving don't want to put their grief on their family, right? Because they're grieving too.
Right.
So, or we have to be strong,
Yeah.
okay? If somebody in your family is grieving, again, don't be afraid to talk to them. Sometimes we might hesitate. Me as a daughter might not want to go to my dad and say, Dad, I know you're hurting, tell me,
Yeah.
you know, because he needs to be strong for the daughter. Or I may not want to do it because I don't want to cause him pain.
Right, right.
When he needs to talk,
Yeah.
when he needs to share his feelings, when he needs, it's not about me, it's about him.
Right.
Simple question, Dad, how are you feeling today?
Hurting.
It looks like you're hurting. Tell me what's going on in your heart, okay? So don't let the fear or feeling uncomfortable
Right.
with the topic stop folks from doing perhaps they really want to do.
Right, right. Or sometimes I think probably the people don't want to ask because they don't want to trigger the individual, you know, for that moment and trigger again the trauma. But I think I agree with you that you have to say, how are you feeling? Just a simple, how are you feeling, you know? Because sometimes they're just waiting to tell it or to say it or to share it with someone,
Yeah.
you know?
Even something simple saying, you know, how are you doing today? I want to let you know I've been thinking about Joe today.
Oh, yeah,
How are you?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know, just something very simple like that.
yeah,
Friends can do the same thing.
yeah.
Very often when we go to a funeral, we tell people, you know, call me if you need something.
Yeah.
Well, don't say that. Just do it. Really, because they're not going to
Well,
want to bother. And if they're in these depressions, if they're in denial, the shock, the fear, the
They
frustration,
will not.
they're not going to call.
Yeah.
So
Could that
take
be,
the step.
Could that be related also to where they are at that moment, at what stage? So let's say if I say, call me if you need anything, but of course they will not call, right? But is that not for them not calling that person, is that related to where the stage of the grieving is, or it's just like in general?
I think it's just in general.
In
They
general.
don't want to bother others
yeah.
with their sadness.
Yeah.
Okay? That
Yeah.
could be just
Okay.
be a human reaction.
Yeah, yeah. Or probably they're kind of ashamed to share something or don't want to be in private, you know. But I agree with that because I have friends who are on chemotherapy, you know, and the treatment and stuff. And so just saying, how are you doing? Or I'm praying for you, it makes them, I think it makes them, you know, comfortable or happy.
Not forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, I
Or,
think that's the word.
You know, even with an illness,
Yeah.
like you say, with chemotherapy, you know, cancer still kind of got a negative stigma with
Right.
it. And so for folks approaching somebody with a serious illness, don't be afraid just to say, hey, tell me what it's like so that I can be a better friend for you.
Yeah,
You know, try not to, don't let the fear or
yeah.
personal anxiety about death or get in the way of being
Yeah.
a friend.
Yeah, because sometimes if someone is helping you or sharing you, you know, that helps a lot. And I would like to share a personal experience. When I was doing my medical training, I was on my second year. Suddenly, I have to go into surgery. Of course, there is the shock, like, oh my God, you know. And then it so happened my co-resident who was doing a rotation in surgery assisted in that surgery. And then he took care of me for the next 2 days that I was hospitalized. He'd follow up the labs, he look at the reports, and then give it to me. And hey, Susan, these are the results, blah, blah, blah. And then he made sure that after the surgery, I will not be in pain. So shout out to Dr. Scott Strom. It sounds like a commercial, but shout out to Dr. Scott Strom. So that moment that I had surgery, I was okay. I feel like okay, you know, because someone took care of everything, someone helped me, and then I'm okay. So I think the human connection is really very comforting.
Yeah.
And it helps a lot, you know. It doesn't have to be like a grand gesture. Like you said, just ask, how are you doing today? Can you share it with me?
Yeah.
You know?
And it seems so
Yeah.
simple. And if we get to a point where, if I get to a point like where I might be a little anxious to ask, then I need to kind of do a little self-inventory, like what makes me anxious about this.
Yes.
And it could be, well, you know, if I ask the question, then she's going to take like forever to give me an answer and I don't have the time, right?
Yeah.
Get in touch with what's causing that little bit of anxiety to be able to allow you to ask the question.
Yes. So if I'm going to ask you, as a chaplain, what is the most memorable or impactful experience that you have that made you say, I'm glad I chose to be a chaplain?
You know, there are a number of examples. One that comes to mind, just a few weeks ago, I was visiting a patient. He was a quadriplegic, very free to tell me what happened to him that caused him to be paralyzed. And he was all tatted up. So it's like, well, okay. Again, those first 7 seconds, we make 11, you know, so I'm telling my brain to shut down, don't do that, right? And he told me this, we were chatting, and he told me this beautiful out-of-body death experience that he had, that, you know, he really believes that he had an experience of heaven. And I walked out of there going, wow, that just blessed my day, you know? I have been with parents struggling because their little one died, either through a drowning or a miscarriage. Makes you glad that you're there to hear their tears and their sadness, their anger. I was with one family who their son had, their 2-year-old, I believe, had Tay-Sachs, which commonly hits the Jewish community, but it hit this family. And to hear the dad and the mom yell, "There's, you know, my son," at the top of their voice, wrenches your heart. But at the same time, to be able to be that, I like to believe like I'm a God presence in the room. I'm not God, but I can be that comforting presence to people that express such deep, deep pain and love.
To be a part of it at that moment and be able to help.
COVID was just another experience. So there are many, each day offers something, a visit that you walk out going, wow, that was just really cool. Good or bad? Good or bad?
It kind of helps and enriches your experience. And then probably in the process, you know, our faith increases because of what we are doing, you know, so that helps. So we have a very engaging topic and, you know, discussion today. I appreciate your presence. So before we end, is there anything else you want to share to our audience?
You know, there's a lot of giftedness in the role of a chaplain. There are times that when I go into a room in the hospital, people are surprised that a woman can be a chaplain. Because we associate chaplains more with military and perhaps prisons. But chaplains are becoming a very common place in hospitals.
Yes.
Corporations are hiring chaplains as well. I was really surprised to learn that one.
Like out of hospital setting.
Yeah, outside of the hospital. So the
I think
role
schools. I think schools also have chaplains now. Isn't
schools
it?
have chaplains, colleges. So the role is widening and becoming more accepting. And within the medical setting, it becomes complementary to the science of medicine, right? With that body, mind, and spirit connection. So physicians will read chaplain notes. We do note in patient charts what our visits were. So going back to the ancient days when physicians did body, mind, and spirit, right? It's allowing that connection to come together. Example, if I visit a patient that might have heart issues, I'll ask them about relationships.
Right.
What's hurting their heart?
Right.
And that I can add that into the chart note because a physician may not ask that question.
Right, right.
The physician is looking at the lab work.
Yeah, lab works, and then the symptoms, and then the risk factors.
Right, right. So it can change. It can change the medical treatment that the patient may receive.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing those experiences, and the way that being a chaplain is now opening doors for other people who wanted to be a chaplain too. So thank you. Appreciate
you're welcome.
it.
Well, thank you for letting me be here.
I know it's. I would love to talk this grief, hope, and human connection. And I would like to share also, before we wrap it up, I'd like to share to our audience that when life knocks us down, get up wherever your situation, whatever your situation. And it is how we face our life challenges that matters. And as I was running this episode in my mind, I thought I would say that this episode is for all of us or all of you who are expressing grief. And no matter what stage of grief you are in, know that there is hope. And also, keep your human connection and your divine connection strong because it will get you through. And then when we have faith, faith believes that all things can be. It is sure of what it hopes for and certain of what it cannot see. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our episode with Sister Terry Mahar. And I'll see you in the next episode. And don't forget to click that subscribe button. So thank you so much and take care of yourselves and blessings.